A titration is a laboratory procedure that we can use to measure the concentration of an analyte in a solution. This is typically done with a piece of glassware called a burette. It's a thin glass tube, depending on the size, it's a couple feet tall, that's marked with volume markings. At the bottom of the burette is a little stopcock, that's a little valve that we can turn so we can control if it's draining and how quickly. The other piece of glassware that's typically used is an Erlenmeyer flask. Sometimes called a conical flask, and this is just a container. Its shape makes it easy to mix just by swirling without risking it spilling over. It can also be done into something like a beaker if you have a way of stirring the solution automatically. We're going to put our analyte as a solution in this bottom flask. This is the stuff we're typically trying to measure. So in some courses you might hear it called a titrand. And we're going to put a solution in the burette called a titrant. T-I-T-R-A-N-T. And essentially the procedure is dripping the titrant into the solution until we've added just enough titrant to react with the analyte. And we use a substance called an indicator to determine when we've reached that point where we've added just enough titrant to react with the analyte. The endpoint, the equivalence point would be terms you might hear for that. Now the concept of that endpoint or equivalence point is it's where we've added just enough so these coefficients in the balanced chemical reaction can be used in a calculation. So let's work on this example. This is an alkalinity titration where we're taking sodium bicarbonate that might be present in a river water sample or an aquarium, and we're titrating it with sulfuric acid. Typically, in this solution, you would add in an indicator, and in this case, the indicator might be bromethymol blue. Don't worry too much about knowing which indicators are used in which place. What's important is that if we look at bromethymol blue, when we start, bromethymol blue has a nice blue color. When there's excess base, in this case sodium bicarbonate, then the bromethymol blue is going to have that blue color. But as we proceed with the titration, and we get to a stage where the sodium bicarbonate has been used up and we have excess acid, it will change to a yellow color. Now, it's not that we want a yellow color, we want the point at which that blue changes to yellow, ideally within about a drop. And when that happens, then we can assume that we've added just enough sulfuric acid and that volume of sulfuric acid, or the 1 mole of sulfuric acid is 2 moles of sodium bicarbonate. We can measure the amount of solution that comes out of the burette, and from that, calculate the moles if we know that concentration, convert it to moles of sulfuric acid, which would be, or sodium bicarbonate, which would be down here, and let's see, sulfuric acid up here, and use it to calculate the concentration of sodium bicarbonate in that unknown. So a procedure might look something like this. Rinse a burette with the titrant and then fill it. And when we fill the burette, it's up here, you're going to record the initial volume. And then add some analyte down here, and it's going to start off as blue. Once we've recorded that initial volume, then we'll start the titration. We'll start dripping in the titrant until that bottom solution changes color, till we reach that endpoint. And now this solution is yellow, and the volume in the burette has gone down. This will be the final volume. You can get the volume of titrant that was required by subtracting those two, and from it calculate what you need to know about the analyte. Now this looks a little different in some cases as we go into commercial kits and things that are used commonly in the public. I have a fish tank, and one of the test kits that we use is a carbonate hardness test kit, and it comes in a little bottle, and you put some fish tank water down here in this flask, and then you count the number of drops that come out of this bottle until this solution changes from blue to yellow. And as you can guess, this is just the same reaction we did before. When it reaches the point where we've used up all of the bicarbonate, then if we've counted the number of drops is like our volume of titrant, and they've set the concentration of sulfuric acid in this bottle, and they've actually put the indicator up here, the bromethymol blue. When you've reached the equivalence point, that number of drops with the concentration that they've set in the container lets you just count the number of drops and change the units, and that's your answer. So this is a practical way to do it. Another couple test kits I've seen use little 1 milliliter syringes. There's a couple variations, but they're all ways of determining how many moles of your titrant is required to react completely with your analyte, and from that calculate the concentration of the analyte.